She always thought she knew what love felt like. Then she realized she had only ever known what control looked like when it wore love's face. Iris had spent 28 years believing her father when he said everything he did was for her own good. That was the word he used. Good. As if good could explain why she wasn't allowed to choose her own university program. As if good could justify the way he spoke to her mother, in that low, cutting voice whenever dinner was 10 minutes late. As if good meant anything at all when his hand came across her face on a Tuesday evening in November, right there in the kitchen of the house she grew up in, while her mother stood at the sink with her back turned and said absolutely nothing. The slap wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the silence that followed it. Iris had just told him she'd accepted a position at a physiotherapy clinic in Hamilton. A good job, a real salary, an apartment she'd already signed the lease on, 30 minutes away from the house she had never once felt truly safe in. She was 28 years old. She had a degree, a license, and a security deposit. She had done everything right by every measure that existed in the world outside that kitchen, and her father looked at her the way he always had, like she was a problem he hadn't yet solved, and he told her she was not going anywhere. She told him she was. That was when it happened. She stood there with her hand pressed to her cheek, and she remembers thinking, very clearly, this is the moment I should walk out the door and never come back. She knows that now. She knew it then too, somewhere deep and certain. But her mother still had her back turned, and her father had already sat back down at the table. And something in Iris, something that had been trained since childhood to shrink, to wait, to absorb, made her stay. That was the mistake she would spend the next 3 years paying for. Her father's name was Gerald. People in their neighborhood thought he was a generous man. He coached youth hockey on Sunday mornings, and he always brought Tim Hortons for the whole team. He remembered birthdays, and he helped elderly neighbors take out their recycling bins. He was the kind of man who got warm eulogies at funerals. Iris knew that, and she understood early on that the version of her father the neighborhood saw was not a lie exactly. It was just a side of him that she and her mother rarely got to keep. At home, Gerald had rules, not written ones. You learn them by breaking them. You learn them by watching your mother flinch when a cupboard door opened too quickly. You learn them by being told, over and over, that you were too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. You learned to make yourself smaller. You learned that smaller was safer. And then, if you were Iris, you spent most of your 20s wondering why you couldn't seem to hold your shape in any room you walked into. Her mother, Diane, was not a cruel woman. Iris wants to be very clear about that, even now. Diane was someone who had been made small too, and who had learned to survive by staying very quiet and keeping the house very clean and never, ever taking sides. She loved Iris in the way that people love things they're afraid to protect, which is to say she loved her at a distance, with her back turned. At the sink, Iris forgave her mother eventually. That took a long time. The man her father had in mind for her was named Stuart. He was 34, the son of Gerald's old business partner, and he had the kind of square jaw and firm handshake that her father admired in people. Iris had met him 3 times at family dinners before her father told her, in a tone that was not quite an order but was certainly not a suggestion, that Stuart was a good match and that she ought to give it a proper chance. She did. Not because she wanted to, but because she was tired. Because the slap was still something she carried around in her body, in the way her shoulders would tighten whenever she heard her father's car in the driveway. Because she had already lost one argument and didn't have the energy left for another. She and Stuart dated for 8 months. He was polite. He paid for dinner. He opened car doors. He also had a way of reframing things, her opinions, her preferences, her plans, so that by the end of any conversation she was no longer sure what she had originally thought. She'd mentioned she wanted to visit her friend Priya in Toronto for a long weekend, and somehow by the time the conversation was over, she'd find herself agreeing that the timing wasn't ideal, that Priya could come to them instead, that it made more sense this way. She wasn't sure when she started noticing it. She just knows she stopped mentioning things. They married in June. Her father paid for the wedding. It was beautiful. She moved into Stuart's house, his house with his furniture, his color choices on the walls, his mother's china in the cabinet. His mother, Margaret, lived 40 minutes away and came over without calling first. Margaret was not unkind to Iris, but she had a way of being present that took up all the air in a room. She rearranged things. She commented on meals. She asked, with a sweetness that had teeth in it, whether Iris was planning to go back to work anytime soon, given that the house wasn't going to take care of itself. Iris had given up the Hamilton position to move in with Stuart. She told herself it was temporary. She'd find something local. She had her license, her skills, her degree in a frame on the wall of a room she wasn't sure felt like hers. She found a part-time position at a clinic in Oakville. Stuart said it was fine. He also said, over time, that it would be nice if she could be home by 6, that she shouldn't have to work full days, that her income wasn't really necessary given his salary, that it might be worth thinking about what they actually wanted their life to look like. Each statement was reasonable on its own. Together, they added up to something that made Iris feel like she was standing in a room that kept getting smaller. She went down to 2 days a week at the clinic. Then one. Then she stopped going in at all. There is a particular kind of loneliness in being surrounded by people who believe they love you. Iris had a husband who called her from work to check in. A mother-in-law who showed up with grocery bags and unsolicited opinions. A father who expected Sunday dinners and would be visibly wounded if she missed them. A mother who texted thinking of you with a small flower emoji once a week and never asked follow-up questions. She had all of these people, and she had never felt more invisible in her life. The thing about being controlled, really controlled, is that it doesn't always look like what you expect. It isn't always shouting. It isn't always a hand across the face. Sometimes it is the slow and patient removal of everything that makes you a specific person. Your opinions, your plans, your job, your friendships, your sense of what you want for dinner, until you are simply a shape that fits into someone else's life without causing inconvenience. Iris reached her lowest point on a Wednesday afternoon in February, standing in Stuart's kitchen. In their kitchen, she corrected herself, though it never once felt that way, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold, watching snow come down on the backyard. She had nowhere to be, no appointment, no shift, no plans that were her own. She was 30 years old and she could not identify a single thing in her immediate surroundings that she had chosen freely. She put the mug in the sink. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed and she cried for about 40 minutes, very quietly, in the way she'd learned to cry as a child, without making any sound that might bring someone to the door. Then she picked up her phone and called Priya. Priya had been Iris's closest friend since second year of university. She was a blunt, warm, slightly chaotic woman who worked in occupational health and had never once softened a truth to make it easier to hear. When Iris finished explaining, there was a short silence on the line. "Iris," Priya said. "You know this isn't okay, I know. Do you?" That question. Iris has thought about it many times since. Do you? Not is it okay, Priya had already answered that. But whether Iris actually knew it, in the way that knowing something means it changes what you do next. She didn't answer right away. That was, she thinks now, the most honest moment of that whole year. Priya didn't push. She just said, "I have a couch and a spare key. I can mail you whenever you're ready." No questions asked. Iris didn't take her up on it right away. She stayed another 4 months. She wants to be honest about that, because she thinks it matters. Because when people hear these stories, they sometimes ask why the woman didn't just leave, as if leaving were a switch you could flip, as if the decision weren't buried under years of being told your instincts were wrong. She stayed because she was scared. She stayed because she didn't trust herself yet. She stayed because Stuart had never once raised his hand to her, and a part of her kept thinking, is this even real? Is it even bad enough? Am I just being too sensitive? The same words her father had used, working their way through a second generation. She left on a Tuesday in June. 1 year after the wedding, she packed 2 bags while Stuart was at work. She left a note on the kitchen table, not because she owed him an explanation, but because she could not bear to disappear without a word that felt too much like something that had been done to her. The note said she was leaving, that she was safe, and that she hoped he found someone who genuinely wanted the life he was building. She meant it. Not warmly, but honestly. She drove to Priya's apartment in Toronto. She cried the whole way there, and then she ate leftover pasta at Priya's kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night, and felt for the first time in what seemed like years, like she could breathe all the way to the bottom of her lungs. She did not speak to her father for 7 months. She did not speak to Stuart at all, except through a lawyer when the separation paperwork needed to be filed. Her mother called twice a week. Iris answered when she could. Diane never said she was sorry. She said things like, "I just hope you'll both come to understand each other eventually, and your father does love you, Iris, in his way." Iris listened. She did not argue. She had run out of energy for arguments that wouldn't go anywhere, and she had just barely started to have enough energy left over for herself. She went back to work. Full-time, at a clinic in downtown Toronto 5 days a week, a schedule she built herself. She rented a small apartment in Leslieville with high ceilings and windows that faced east and no one's furniture in it but her own. She bought a second-hand reading chair in a dark green color that she loved and had never once been asked to justify. She cooked things she actually wanted to eat. She went to sleep when she was tired. She woke up and the day was hers. She started therapy that autumn, which she mentions not as a footnote but as one of the more important things she did. Her therapist's name was Dr. Osi. He was patient and precise, and he had a way of asking questions that made Iris feel like she was being seen clearly for the first time in a long while. He helped her understand trauma bonding and the psychology of why people stay in situations that are hurting them, and why too sensitive is something people say when they need you to stop noticing what they're doing to you. She thought about the slap a lot in those sessions. Not just the slap, the silence after it. Her mother's back turned, the way Iris herself had stayed. She cried about it, she got angry about it. She let it be a real thing that had happened to her, rather than something she kept trying to make smaller so it would be easier to carry. That process took a long time, she won't pretend otherwise. She met Daniel the following spring, at a fundraiser for a community health organization that Priya had dragged her to. He was standing near the drinks table, looking mildly uncomfortable in the way that people do at events, when they genuinely showed up because they care about the cause and are not sure what to do with themselves once they've donated. He was a high school science teacher. He coached the junior soccer team on Tuesday evenings and took it very seriously. He had a younger sister he was clearly devoted to, and a dog named Brisket, who was by all accounts completely out of control and deeply loved. He was not smooth. He didn't have Stuart's firm handshake or Gerald's effortless command of a room. He was just a person, clearly himself, talking to her like she was clearly herself. And when he asked what she did and she said physiotherapy, he asked a follow-up question that was genuinely curious rather than politely dismissive, and they ended up talking for 2 hours in a corner of the room until Priya appeared at Iris's elbow and gave her a look that Iris pretended not to understand. She told him on their third date about the marriage and about her father, because she had learned by then that she had no interest in relationships that were built on a carefully edited version of herself. She told him the parts she was still ashamed of. The part where she stayed. The part where she turned down the Hamilton job. The part where she cried silently so nobody would hear her. She told him because she needed to know whether the truth of her was something someone could sit across from without flinching. Daniel listened. He didn't flinch. He said quietly that he was glad she trusted him with it. Then he said, "For what it's worth, I think the fact that you left matters more than the fact that you stayed." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "That's the first time anyone has said that to me." "Well," he said, "it's true." She saw her father again for the first time that Christmas. Her mother had asked, and Iris had agreed on the condition that she could leave whenever she needed to. She drove herself. She sat at the table across from Gerald, who was older and seemed somehow shorter than she remembered. He did not apologize. He looked at her with something that might have been regret, or might have been pride, and he said gruffly that she was looking well. She said thank you. She ate her dinner. She left at 8 o'clock as planned. On the drive home she felt something she hadn't expected. Not forgiveness exactly. She wasn't there yet, and she wasn't sure she ever fully would be. More like a kind of clarity. She could see her father now without the distortion of needing something from him. He was a man who had never examined himself and had built a life on the assumption that love meant obedience. He had hurt her. He had also, in some way that she was still working out, made her into someone who knew exactly what she would not accept. That was not a gift she had chosen, but it was something she carried now, and she was beginning to understand how to carry it without letting it take up all the space. She and Daniel moved in together the following autumn. She chose the apartment. He chose the furniture for one room. She chose the rest. It was not a negotiated compromise. It was just two people with different strengths doing the thing they were better at without anyone keeping score. He proposed on a Sunday morning in their kitchen, with coffee going and Brisket causing some kind of havoc in the hallway and no particular fanfare. He just asked. She just said yes. And then she cried a little, not from sadness, but from the strange and unfamiliar feeling of being exactly where she wanted to be. There are things Iris still works on. She still sometimes hears her father's voice when she asserts herself in a professional setting, too sensitive, too much, and has to remind herself that those were his limitations, not her instructions. She still finds herself, occasionally, watching for signs that the floor might shift under her, that the version of a person she trusts will turn into something else when she isn't looking. Dr. Osei calls that a survival skill that outlasted the danger, and they are working slowly on letting her nervous system believe that she is safe now. She is mostly, that is not a small thing. Her daughter, born the spring after the wedding, is named Evie. She has her father's dark eyes and Iris's stubbornness and an absolute certainty about what she wants at any given moment that Iris finds genuinely astonishing. She is 3 years old and she already says no thank you with a clarity and confidence that Iris spent 28 years trying to locate in herself. Iris watches her sometimes and thinks, she will never have to unlearn this. She will grow up knowing her voice is allowed to take up space. She will grow up in a house where love does not require her to be smaller. That is the thing Iris would most like people to understand if they take anything from her story. Not that her father was a monster, he was not, entirely. And that ambiguity is part of what made it so hard to see clearly. Not that her marriage was the worst thing that could have happened. It wasn't. and she knows that others have survived far worse. But that the damage done by control and silence and the constant message that your instincts are wrong, that damage is real, and it is cumulative, and it is survivable. She survived it. She is still surviving it, which is a different thing and also true. She looks at She looks at Daniel, who is in the next room arguing cheerfully with Brisket about something that doesn't matter. She looks at the green chair in the corner that she chose because she loved the color and for no other reason at all. The past is the past. She doesn't need to drag it into every room she enters. She is here now. And here finally is somewhere she chose to be.